The flashing lights painted my 100-year-old barn in strokes of garish red and blue, a disco party for the damned. President Penelope of the Harmony Creek Estates Homeowners Association was screaming, a full-throated, vein-popping shriek that probably scared the coyotes 2 counties over. Her face, usually a mask of smug superiority, was a crumpled mess of disbelief and impotent rage. A deputy, young Evans with the perpetually confused look, was trying to calm her down while Sheriff Brody just watched from the hood of his cruiser, arms crossed, a tiny smirk playing on his lips. My one bill, the crispest dollar you've ever seen, was clutched in my fist. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in a standoff with a screaming HOA president, 2 deputies, and the county sheriff, all over a single piece of currency. It all started 6 months earlier, with a rooster. Not a real rooster, mind you. A 10-foot-tall, magnificent bastard of a statue made from rusted scrap metal. My grandpa won it in a poker game in '78, and it had stood sentry by our property line ever since. It was ugly as sin, a glorious monument to bad taste and rural defiance. For 30 years, it just was. Then, they built Harmony Creek Estates. They clear-cut 100 acres of neighboring woods, slapped up 200 beige houses that all looked like they were printed from the same cheap 3D printer, and called it a luxury community. With the houses came the covenants, and with the covenants came the queen of all clipboard Karens, President Penelope. My first interaction with her was on a Tuesday. I was mending a fence post, mud up to my elbows, when a pristine white sedan crunched to a halt on the gravel shoulder of the county road. A woman emerged, dressed in pastel pink athleisure wear that had never seen a bead of sweat. She held a clipboard like it was the stone tablet Moses brought down from the mountain. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending sweetness that sets your teeth on edge. "I'm Penelope, president of the Harmony Creek HOA. Are you the owner of this parcel?" She waved a manicured hand vaguely at my 300 acres of rolling hills, fields, and forest. My family had worked this land since my great-great-grandfather got it in a land grant. "I am," I said, not bothering to wipe the mud from my hands. "And you are?" she asked, a little tick appearing in her eye as she looked at my dirt-caked boots. "The owner?" I repeated slowly. She consulted her clipboard. "Right. Well, I'm here to deliver your official welcome packet and a list of preliminary violations that will need to be addressed to bring your property into compliance with community standards." She said community standards like it was a sacred phrase. She was a missionary, and my ranch was the unwashed heathen she was here to save. She held out a thick binder. I just looked at her. "I'm not in your community," I said. "My property line ends at that old stone wall. You're standing on the county easement. Your community is over there." I pointed with a muddy finger toward the sea of beige. Penelope's smile tightened. It was like watching a hydraulic press try to crush a marshmallow. "That's a common misconception. The developer's survey included this access road and a 20-foot aesthetic buffer. Your property falls within the HOA's jurisdictional overlay. It's all in the packet." A jurisdictional overlay. It sounded like something you'd get for a fungal infection. I knew for a fact it was horseshit. But my cousin Frank, the lawyer, had given me one piece of advice when the development first went up. Let them make the first 50 mistakes. Don't correct them. Just document them. So I took the binder. Her eyes immediately darted past me to the glorious, rusty rooster. "And that," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "that will have to be the first thing to go. It violates Section 14, subsection B, regarding non-conforming lawn and garden statuary. My rooster wasn't on a lawn, and it sure as hell wasn't in a garden. But I just nodded. "I'll look into it." The binder was a masterpiece of bureaucratic nonsense. 200 pages of rules about everything from the acceptable shade of mailbox post paint, Tuscan beige or desert sand, to the maximum allowable height for blades of grass, 4 inches. It was a tyrant's manifesto written in the language of passive aggression. That first letter was about the rooster. The second was about my barn, which was, and I quote, "a shade of red not pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee," The barn had been that color since the Roosevelt administration, Teddy Roosevelt. The third letter informed me that my fence, a functional cattle fence made of wood and wire, was not an approved style. They recommended a white picket or wrought iron. For 300 acres. I could have bought a small island for what that would cost. I filed every letter. I saved every threatening email. I never responded. Never argued. To Penelope, my silence was an admission of guilt from a simple-minded country bumpkin who was overwhelmed by her superior intellect and organizational prowess. She saw a hick in muddy boots who didn't understand the sophisticated world of covenants, conditions, and restrictions. She had no idea I spent my winters reading case law for fun, or that my great-grandfather's original hand-drawn survey map, the one registered with the federal government a century ago, was sitting in a fireproof box in my office. She thought the game was about lawn statues and fence posts. She had no idea the game was about the very land her beige palace was built on. Her fatal mistake was arrogance. She believed her binder of rules was the highest law in the land. She'd never considered that the land itself had laws of its own, ancient laws written in ink and iron, that predated her precious HOA by 100 years. The fines started small, $50 for the rooster, $100 for the barn. They escalated with late fees and administrative charges she invented on the spot. I just let them pile up, creating a beautiful paper trail of her escalating madness. Old Man Hemlock, my neighbor to the west whose family had been here as long as mine, would watch her drive by. "That woman's wound tighter than a $2 watch," he'd say, spitting tobacco juice. "She thinks the clipboard gives her power. Power ain't on paper, boy. It's in the dirt." He was right. And Penelope was about to get a masterclass in the power of dirt. The total of the fake fines climbed past $10,000. That's when she decided to play her trump card. She sent a letter, certified mail this time, declaring my property a chronic nuisance and a financial drain on the community. Therefore, the HOA board had voted to place a lien on my ranch. And if the lien wasn't paid in 30 days, they would exercise their right to foreclose and sell the property at public auction to recoup their losses. It was the most beautifully stupid, legally unhinged document I had ever seen. Cousin Frank laughed for a solid 10 minutes when I read it to him over the phone. "They can't do that," he chuckled. "A private HOA can't just foreclose on a property that isn't part of their platted subdivision. The county clerk would laugh them out of the office." "Oh, I know," I said, looking out my window at my rusty rooster, gleaming in the afternoon sun. "But I think we should let them try." Frank went quiet for a second. "What are you planning?" "She's building a cage for me," I said. "I'm just going to let her finish it. Then I'm going to help her step inside and lock the door herself." That's when the real fun began. I was about to teach President Penelope a lesson in jurisdiction, a lesson that would cost her a lot more than a non-compliant rooster. The escalation phase began, as these things often do, with a drone. It was a fancy, professional-grade model, the kind real estate agents use to make tiny suburban lots look like sprawling estates. I first saw it hovering over my back pasture, a buzzing, plastic mosquito spying on my Hereford cattle. It was a direct violation of state privacy laws, but I knew complaining would be pointless. Penelope's playbook wasn't based on actual laws. It was based on the sheer force of her own audacity. She believed if she acted like she had the authority, people would just assume she did. And, for the most part, with the Beige House residents, she was right. They were too tired or too intimidated to fight back against the constant stream of violation notices for leaving garage doors open or having the wrong kind of welcome mat. I was different. I had time, I had patience, and I had the deeds. I took high-resolution photos of the drone. I noted the date, the time, and its GPS location, which was squarely over my land. I sent the photos to Cousin Frank, who added them to a growing digital folder he'd labeled The Harmony Creek Follies. The drone became a daily presence. It would hover outside my office window. It would follow my truck down my own driveway. It was a tool of intimidation, a constant reminder that I was being watched by the all-seeing eye of the HOA. Penelope thought she was gathering evidence of my non-compliance. What she was really doing was documenting her own criminal harassment. Around this time, I started making my visits to Old Man Hemlock more frequent. He was in his late 80s, sharp as a tack, and his memory was a living library of local history. We'd sit on his porch, drinking iced tea, and I'd bring out the old maps. "See here, Mr. Hemlock," I'd say, tracing a faded line with my finger on my great-grandfather's 1912 survey. "This is the original Grant Line, runs right along the creek bed." He'd nod, his eyes clear. "That's right. The developer who put up them new houses, that fella from the city, he tried to buy my daddy out 30 years ago. Daddy told him the survey he had was junk, based on a magnetic north, reading from the 70s, that didn't account for local declination. Threw all his eastern boundary lines off by 50 yards. 50 yards. It doesn't sound like much. But over the length of the property, 50 yards was the difference between Harmony Creek Estates being a legal subdivision and being a massive, multi-million-dollar trespass. The developer, a slick operator named Sterling, had cut corners. He'd used a cheap, modern survey that ignored the original, federally filed plats. He'd then sold the lots, established the HOA, and vanished, leaving people like Penelope to rule over a kingdom built on a foundation of sand. A kingdom built entirely on my land. "Did Sterling ever record a new plat with the county?" I asked. Hemlock laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "He tried. Judge Miller, Old Man Miller back then, took one look at it and told him it conflicted with the Patterson grant that's your family's grant in the Hemlock deed. Told him to go settle it with you folks first. Sterling never did. He just built the damn things anyway, probably figuring nobody would ever check. And nobody had, until now." While Penelope was busy writing fines for my unapproved shade of barn red, I was at the county records office, pulling every deed and plat map filed since 1900. I hired a licensed surveyor, not a cheap one, but the best in the state to do a quiet, modern confirmation of the original 1912 survey lines using satellite GPS. It cost me a small fortune, but it was the best money I'd ever spent. The result was a legally indisputable map that showed every single house, road, and manicured lawn in Harmony Creek Estates was sitting squarely, unequivocally, on land titled to my family. The HOA didn't just have jurisdiction over my ranch, they had no jurisdiction at all, because their entire association was trespassing. But I kept that ace of spades tucked so far up my sleeve, it was practically in my armpit. The HOA scheduled a hearing about my chronic noncompliance. It was held in the community's sterile clubhouse, a room that smelled of air freshener and quiet desperation. The board consisted of Penelope and 3 enablers: a nervous-looking man named Gary who avoided eye contact, a woman named Barb who nodded at everything Penelope said, and a younger guy, Mark, who looked deeply uncomfortable. I came in, dressed in my usual work jeans and a clean shirt. I was calm. I was polite. Penelope, on the other hand, was in her element. She sat at the head of the table like a queen presiding over a star chamber. She had a PowerPoint presentation. A PowerPoint presentation about my rooster. She clicked through slides showing grainy, drone-captured images of my fence, my barn, and, of course, the rooster. She used phrases like flagrant disregard for the aesthetic integrity of the community and a pattern of willful defiance. When she was done, she looked at me, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" she asked, the question a mere formality. "Yes, I do," I said calmly, pulling a small audio recorder from my pocket and placing it on the table. "For the record, could you please state your name and the names of the board members present?" The mood in the room shifted. The confidence in Penelope's face flickered. "We are not being recorded," she snapped. "This is a private meeting." "Actually," I said, my voice still even, "under state law, any meeting of a homeowners association board where official business is conducted is open to recording by any member. Now, you've asserted that I am a member by jurisdiction, so I'm exercising my right to record. Unless you'd like to state for the official record that I'm not a member and you have no authority over me at all." It was a beautiful little trap. Checkmate in one move. She couldn't have it both ways. Barb and Gary exchanged panicked looks. Young Mark actually looked impressed. Penelope, trapped by her own ridiculous rules, fumed. "Fine," she hissed. "I am Penelope. This is Barbara, Gary, and Mark." "Thank you," I said. "Now, as to the matter of the fines and the lien, I'd like to see the specific, platted survey map filed with the county that explicitly incorporates my parcel, APN 704B, into the Harmony Creek Estates HOA." Penelope shuffled her papers. "It's in the developer's master plan." "I'm not asking for the developer's plan," I said. "I'm asking for the official, recorded county plat map, the legal document that defines the boundaries of your association. Can you provide it?" She couldn't, of course, because it didn't exist. She blustered, talking about jurisdictional overlays and master covenants, but she couldn't produce the one document that mattered. The board, except for Mark, who was now studying his cuticles with intense interest, voted exactly as she told them to. They unanimously affirmed the fines and the lien, and officially authorized the foreclosure proceedings. As I walked out, I paused at the door. "Thank you for your time," I said. "And thank you for this official, recorded meeting where you, the board of the Harmony Creek HOA, have formally declared your intention to file a lien and foreclose on a property you cannot prove you have any legal jurisdiction over. I'm sure that recording will be very useful." The color drained from Gary's face. The auction was on. The official notice was a thing of beauty, a testament to bureaucratic hubris. It was posted in the smallest legal section of the local newspaper and tacked to the community clubhouse bulletin board, right next to a flyer for a hot yoga class. "Public auction," it declared in bold letters, "due to chronic and willful violation of covenants." It listed my property's address and assessor's parcel number. Penelope, in her infinite wisdom and cheapness, had used a cut-rate auctioneer and a boilerplate online form to set it up. And, in her haste to punish the insolent farmer, she made a critical, beautiful mistake. She forgot to set a reserve price. This meant that, legally, the property had to be sold to the highest bidder, no matter how low that bid was. It was an oversight a first-year law student would have caught. But Penelope wasn't a lawyer. She was a tyrant high on her own supply of imaginary power. My preparations were simple. I went to the bank and withdrew $100 in the crispest, newest bills I could get. I put one of them in my wallet and the other 99 in my shirt pocket. I called Cousin Frank. "It's go time," I said. "Are you ready?" The petition for injunctive relief and the complaint for trespass, slander of title, and harassment are drafted, notarized, and ready to file the second you tell me to," he said. His voice was giddy with the glee only a lawyer about to win an unwinnable case can feel. "This is going to be glorious. Just have the process server on standby," I told him. The day of the auction was a perfect autumn Saturday. The sky was a sharp, cloudless blue. A small crowd of about 30 people had gathered on the county road at the edge of my property. Most were my nosy Harmony Creek neighbors, drawn by the scent of drama. Penelope was there, naturally, standing beside a nervous-looking man in a cheap suit the auctioneer. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit, radiating an aura of smug victory. She was about to see the culmination of her crusade. The defiant hick was about to be cast out, his land sold to pay for his sins against beige. She saw me pull up in my old pickup truck, and her smile faltered for a half-second. She likely expected I'd be hiding in my house in shame. I got out, gave a friendly nod to Sheriff Brody, who was leaning against his cruiser a short distance away, observing. He was here to keep the peace, but his eyes held a glimmer of amusement. He'd dealt with Penelope's trivial calls for months. I think he was as curious as I was to see how this would play out. I registered for the auction, and the auctioneer's assistant, a bored-looking teenager, handed me a paddle with the number 17 on it. Penelope watched me, her expression a mixture of confusion and contempt. She probably thought I was there to beg, or maybe to bid on my own home out of desperation. The auctioneer, a man who introduced himself as Donnie, cleared his throat and began his spiel. He read the legal description of the property, stumbling over the acreage. He listed the trumped-up debts owed to the HOA, a figure Penelope had inflated to over $15,000 with legal fees and administrative costs. He spoke of the property's tremendous potential for development. Gesturing toward my family's historic barn and pastures, the Harmony Creek residents murmured amongst themselves. They were seeing a 300-acre ranch, a prime piece of real estate, and they were smelling a bargain. Penelope was practically vibrating with excitement. This was her moment of triumph. "All right, folks," Donnie the auctioneer said, getting to the main event. "We're here to sell this property to the highest bidder. What am I bid to start? Do I hear $20,000? $20,000 to open?" Silence. Crickets. The Harmony Creek residents looked at each other, none willing to be the first to jump. They wanted a steal, not just a deal. "Okay, folks, let's get it started," Donnie said, his voice a little strained. "Give me $10,000 for this incredible parcel." More silence. A cool breeze rustled the leaves in the oak trees. Penelope's triumphant expression was beginning to curdle into anxiety. She glared at the crowd as if trying to will them to bid. "5,000? Donnie pleaded. "Someone give me 5,000. Nothing. This was part of my plan. Before the auction, I'd had quiet words with a few of the larger local ranchers and developers who might have been interested. I didn't tell them my whole plan, just enough. I showed them a copy of my great-grandfather's deed and the new survey. I explained there was a significant title cloud on the property, a legal dispute that could tie the land up in court for years. No sane investor wants to buy a lawsuit. The word had spread quietly through the local good old boy network. The big fish were staying away. That just left the piranhas from Harmony Creek, and they were too cheap to start the bidding. Donnie was sweating now. An auction with no opening bid is a professional embarrassment. He looked at Penelope, who was shooting him daggers. "Folks, I have to have a bid to proceed," he said, his voice cracking with desperation. "Somebody give me anything. $1,000? Silence. 500? Still nothing. The crowd was just watching the drama unfold. This was better than television. $100? He begged. I let the silence hang for a moment longer, savoring it. I let Penelope's panic ripen. Then slowly, I raised my paddle. $1, I said, my voice calm and clear. Donnie, Penelope, and the entire crowd turned to stare at me. "I'm sorry, sir?" Donnie said, thinking he'd misheard. $1, I repeated. "I am bidding $1. A gasp went through the crowd. Penelope's face went from pale to blood red in an instant. "That's not a real bid," she shrieked. "He can't do that." "Ma'am," Donnie said, a hint of steel in his voice now. He was a professional, and he knew the rules, even if she didn't. "It is a legal bid. I have an opening bid of $1. Do I hear $2? Do I hear $2? He scanned the crowd. Everyone was frozen, watching the spectacle. No one was going to bid against me now. It was too weird, too fraught. Something was clearly going on that they didn't understand. "Going once?" Donnie said, his voice regaining its rhythmic auctioneer's cadence. $1. Penelope was marching toward me. "You can't do this. This is a mockery." Sheriff Brody took one step forward. "Ma'am, let the man do his job. You can sort it out later." "Going twice," Donnie called out, his eyes on me. "Sold," he yelled, slamming his hand down on his notepad as if it were a gavel. "To bidder number 17 for $1. A wave of stunned silence washed over the crowd, followed by a flurry of whispers. I walked forward, pulled the crisp dollar bill from my wallet, and handed it to the bewildered auctioneer. "I believe this is yours," I said. Penelope finally lost it. The carefully constructed dam of her superiority burst, and a torrent of pure, undiluted rage poured out. "No, I forbid it. This is illegal. I'm calling the police," she screamed, fumbling for her phone. That's when Sheriff Brody sighed, pushed himself off his cruiser, and started walking toward us. "Ma'am," he said, his voice tired. "You did call the police. I'm right here." And that's when she started screaming. That raw, animal shriek of someone whose entire world has just collapsed because of a single dollar bill. The disco lights of arriving backup started flashing. The curtain had just risen on the final act. Sheriff Brody held up a hand, a silent command for everyone to just hold their horses. Young Evans, the deputy, Looked like he'd rather be wrestling a greased pig than dealing with this particular brand of suburban meltdown. Penelope was still sputtering, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He's stealing my property! Arrest him!" she shrieked at the sheriff. Brody looked at me, then at the dollar bill Donnie the auctioneer was still holding like it was a holy relic. Then he looked at Penelope. "Ma'am, let me get this straight," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You, representing the HOA, initiated a foreclosure auction. This man," he gestured to me, "was the high bidder. The property was sold to him in accordance with the rules of the auction you set up. Now you're claiming he's the one breaking the law?" The simple, brutal logic of it hung in the air. Penelope's brain seemed to short-circuit. She couldn't process a world where her own flawless plan had turned on her so completely. But it was for $1, she wailed. "That's not fair." "Fair wasn't a price listed on the auction notice," Brody said flatly. "The term was highest bidder. Was there a reserve price on this auction, Mr. Donnie?" The auctioneer, who looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole, shook his head miserably. "No, Sheriff. No reserve. It sells for the highest bid, whatever that is." Brody nodded slowly, a dark satisfaction dawning in his eyes. He'd had a belly full of Penelope's nonsense for months, about kids playing basketball in the street, complaints about holiday decorations left up a day too long. This was payback, served cold on a public stage. "Well then," Brody said, turning his gaze back to me, "looks like you just bought yourself a ranch." He then looked at the crowd of gawking neighbors. "Show's over, folks. Time to move along. That should have been the end of it." A hilarious, petty victory. I'd have my land back, free of any lien, for the price of a cup of coffee. I'd have a legendary story to tell. But I hadn't gone to all this trouble just to get back to where I started. I had let Penelope build this entire legal scaffold not so I could escape it, but so I could use it as a platform. I let the crowd start to disperse. I let Penelope stew in her impotent fury. I waited until young Evans was trying to gently escort her back to her pristine sedan. Then I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Actually, Sheriff, the show isn't quite over," I said, my voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. Everyone stopped. "There's one more piece of business to attend to." From the inside pocket of my jacket, I pulled a thick, waterproof document tube. I unscrewed the cap and slid out two things. The first was the brand new satellite-verified survey map. The second was the original 1,912 land grant deed, its paper yellowed with age, but the ink still dark and clear. I walked over to the hood of Brody's cruiser and spread the new survey out, weighing the corners down with a couple of rocks. "What's this?" Brody asked, leaning in for a closer look. "That, Sheriff," I said, "is a current, state-licensed survey of my property, APN 704B. The boundaries are marked in red." He looked at the map. He saw the red line, and then he saw the faint gray lines within it, the lines that depicted all the houses and streets of Harmony Creek Estates. His eyes widened. "And this," I said, carefully placing the old deed next to it, "is the original federal land grant and the founding survey map for this parcel, as recorded in the county courthouse over a century ago. The document upon which my title rests." Penelope, who had overheard me, stomped back over, her face a mask of confusion. "What is this nonsense? What does some dusty old paper have to do with anything?" "This dusty old paper, Penelope," I said, looking her dead in the eye, "is the primary legal document defining ownership of this land. Your developer's survey, the one your entire HOA is based on, was faulty. He never rectified the title discrepancy with my family, as ordered by a judge 30 years ago. He just built anyway." I tapped the map with my finger, right on top of the little box that represented her own house. According to the legal and historical record, every square inch of Harmony Creek Estates, your house, Barb's house, the clubhouse, the community pool, all of it, was built on my family's private property. For the last 2 years, your entire community has been trespassing. A profound, absolute silence fell over the road. The Harmony Creek residents looked at the map, then at their own homes in the distance, then back at the map. The implications began to dawn on their faces, a slow-motion wave of horror. Gary, the nervous board member, looked like he was going to be physically ill. Young Mark was just staring at me, his mouth hanging open. Penelope just shook her head, a frantic, jerky motion. No, no, that's impossible. We have deeds. We all have deeds. You have deeds to your houses. Yes, I said, nodding. But the developer sold you deeds to property he didn't have a clear title to. You own your beige boxes, but you don't own the dirt they're sitting on. I do. Cousin Frank had timed it perfectly. A nondescript sedan pulled up, and a man in a polo shirt got out, holding a stack of envelopes. This was the process server. He walked up to Penelope and handed her the first envelope. Penelope, I said, my voice calm and devoid of malice. The auction today was very helpful. In front of the county sheriff and 30 witnesses, you, as president of the HOA, attempted to foreclose on my property. In doing so, you have publicly and legally affirmed two things. First, that I am the owner of this parcel, and second, that your HOA claims authority over it. You can't have one without the other. I let that sink in. Your own actions have established the legal standing for the lawsuit we are now filing. That envelope contains a summons for trespass, slander of title, and a petition for immediate eviction against the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association and all its residents. The process server then moved through the stunned crowd of Harmony Creek residents, handing each homeowner their own personal notice of eviction. Panic erupted. People were shouting, crying, frantically dialing their lawyers. Penelope just stood there, the summons shaking in her hand, her face utterly blank with shock. The clipboard lay forgotten on the ground by her feet. Her weapon, her symbol of power, was now just a piece of trash on a dirt road she didn't own. I had used her own pettiness, her own arrogance, as the trigger for a legal bomb she never saw coming. She thought she was foreclosing on a ranch, but she had just auctioned off her own entire community, and I'd bought it for $1. The aftermath was a beautiful, chaotic symphony of poetic justice. The news spread through Harmony Creek like a wildfire. My phone started ringing off the hook, but it wasn't angry residents. It was terrified residents. People who had been fined for having the wrong color flowers, people who had been harassed by Penelope for years, were suddenly my biggest fans. They didn't want to fight me. They wanted to know how to get out from under the mess Penelope had created. My cousin Frank was a master. He wasn't actually trying to evict 200 families. That would be a legal and logistical nightmare. The eviction notice was the cannon shot across the bow, the legal maneuver that brought everyone to the table, with me holding all the cards. The first emergency community meeting was held 2 days later, not in the sterile clubhouse, but in the high school auditorium to accommodate the massive, angry crowd. I wasn't there, but Frank was. He told me it was a sight to behold. Penelope tried to preside, tried to regain control, but her power had evaporated. The residents, now armed with the knowledge that their life savings were invested in houses built on someone else's land, turned on her. They screamed at her, they accused her, they demanded her resignation. She was a queen without a kingdom, a captain on a ship she had already scuttled. The developer, Sterling, was tracked down by a consortium of lawyers the homeowners hired. He was living in a penthouse in another state, and he was about to be buried under an avalanche of lawsuits for title fraud. But my business wasn't with him, it was with the land. I offered the residents a deal, presented through Frank. It was simple, and, I thought, generous. I would not evict them. I would grant a permanent land lease to each individual homeowner for their specific lot. The price of the lease? $1 per year for 99 years. There was a catch, of course. A beautiful, simple catch. The land lease agreement, which each homeowner would have to sign individually, contained a single, powerful clause. The lessee agrees that the property is not and will never be subject to any private homeowners association or its covenants, conditions, and restrictions. To save their homes, they had to formally, legally, and permanently dissolve the Harmony Creek Estates HOA. It was a kill switch, and they couldn't push it fast enough. They voted that very night. It was unanimous. The HOA was to be disbanded immediately. The covenants were null and void. The reign of beige was over. Penelope was stripped of her title and her power in a brutal public humiliation. She sold her house a month later at a significant loss. The title issue, even with the lease agreement, scared off many buyers and moved away. I never saw her again. The last I heard, she'd moved into a condo complex with an even stricter HOA, which felt like the most perfect form of self-inflicted punishment imaginable. The day the dissolution papers were officially filed with the county was another perfect autumn afternoon. I took a cold beer and walked out to the edge of my property, the place where it all started. The "Welcome to Harmony Creek Estate" sign had been taken down. The houses were still there, of course, but they looked different now. People were putting up basketball hoops. A house down the street was being painted a cheerful blue. Someone had a plastic flamingo on their lawn. It was becoming a neighborhood, not a sterile compound. My rusty rooster stood proud, glinting in the setting sun. It had been the first target of Penelope's war, and now it was a silent monument to her defeat. It was no longer just a piece of scrap metal my grandpa won in a card game. It was a symbol. It was a reminder that the oldest laws are not the ones written on clipboards, but the ones written in the dirt, in deeds, in the memory of the land itself. I took a long sip of my beer and looked out over my 300 acres. The cattle were grazing peacefully. The barn stood defiantly red against the darkening sky. The world was quiet again. My world, on my terms. I had let a petty tyrant build her own prison, brick by bureaucratic brick. I let her walk into it, slam the door, and hand me the key. And the price of all that peace and quiet, the price of absolute victory, $1. Tell me where you're listening from, because I want to know where stories like this matter. And if you've ever had to battle a clipboard tyrant with a binder full of nonsense, go ahead and tap that like button. You're my kind of people.